In the ancient kingdom of Valdoria, where golden spires pierce the morning mist and secrets lurk behind every tapestry, the royal guard has sworn an oath that has never been broken in 3 centuries. But, on one fateful autumn evening, when Queen Isabella's carefully constructed composure finally shattered like fragile glass, even the most loyal protectors would be forced to choose between their sovereign and their conscience. What started as whispered rumors in the servants' quarters would soon echo through the marble halls, threatening to topple a dynasty that had weathered wars, plagues, and political storms. The guards who witnessed what happened that night would carry a burden that would change not only their lives, but the very foundation of the royal bloodline forever. Some secrets are meant to protect the crown. Others are meant to destroy it. This is the story of when loyalty became betrayal, when silence became complicity, and when the most trusted protectors of the realm discovered that sometimes the greatest threat to the kingdom comes from within its own walls. The evening mist clung to the towers of Valdoria's royal palace like ghostly fingers, obscuring the ancient stone gargoyles that had watched over the kingdom for generations. Captain Marcus Thorne adjusted his ceremonial sword as he walked the familiar corridors, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors that had been worn smooth by countless royal processions. The palace felt different tonight, charged with an electric tension that made the seasoned guard's instincts prickle with unease. Marcus had served the royal family for 15 years, working his way up from a common soldier to the captain of the royal guard through unwavering dedication and an unshakable moral compass. He had protected King Edmund through 2 assassination attempts, had stood vigil during Queen Isabella's difficult pregnancies, and had trained young Prince Alexander in the art of swordsmanship. The royal family was more than his duty. They were his life's work, his sacred trust. But, lately, something had been shifting in the palace's carefully orchestrated harmony. Queen Isabella, once known for her grace and diplomatic wisdom, had become increasingly volatile. The servants whispered of broken china and raised voices echoing from the royal chambers. King Edmund seemed perpetually exhausted, dark circles shadowing his once bright eyes. The prince, barely 16, had grown sullen and withdrawn, spending more time in the library than in the training yards. As Marcus rounded the corner toward the east wing, he nearly collided with Lady Catherine Moreau, the Queen's longtime lady-in-waiting. The woman's usually pristine appearance was disheveled, her graying hair escaping from its neat bun, and her hands trembled as she clutched a silver tray laden with untouched food. "Captain Thorne," she breathed, relief flooding her weathered features. "Thank goodness. Her Majesty has been particularly difficult this evening. She dismissed the other attendants and has been alone for hours. I fear something is terribly wrong." Marcus studied the older woman's face, noting the worry lines that had deepened over the past months. Lady Catherine had served Queen Isabella since before her marriage to King Edmund, had been present for every triumph and tragedy of the royal couple's 20-year union. If she was concerned, the situation was serious indeed. "What exactly happened?" Marcus asked, his voice low but commanding. He had learned long ago that information was often more valuable than sword work in protecting the royal family. Lady Catherine glanced around nervously before speaking. She received a message this afternoon. A private courier, very discreet. After reading it, she went pale as death and retreated to her chambers. She hasn't allowed anyone in since, not even the king. When I tried to bring her evening meal, she threw a candlestick at the door and screamed that everyone was plotting against her. The captain's jaw tightened. Queen Isabella's behavior had been erratic for weeks, but this level of paranoia was unprecedented. He thought of the various threats the Royal Intelligence Network had been monitoring, political dissidents in the eastern provinces, foreign ambassadors making unusual inquiries, and the growing unrest among the merchant class over new taxation policies. Any of these could have triggered the Queen's current state. "Where is His Majesty?" Marcus inquired, already formulating a plan to handle the delicate situation. "In his study, meeting with Chancellor Aldrich about the grain shortage in the Western Territories. He doesn't know about the courier or the Queen's current condition. I didn't want to interrupt such important discussions unless absolutely necessary." Marcus nodded approvingly. Lady Catherine's discretion had likely prevented a diplomatic incident. The kingdom's food supply was a matter of national security, and any disruption to those negotiations could have far-reaching consequences. As they spoke, a crash echoed from the direction of the Queen's chambers, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Both Marcus and Lady Catherine froze, their eyes meeting in shared alarm. The captain's hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt, though he couldn't imagine what threat might require armed intervention in the Queen's private rooms. "Stay here," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Send word to Lieutenant Hayes to double the guard rotations, but do it quietly. We don't want to alarm the staff or visiting dignitaries." Lady Catherine curtsied quickly and hurried away, her soft slippers barely making a sound on the polished stone. Marcus straightened his uniform jacket and approached the Queen's chambers with measured steps, his mind racing through potential scenarios and appropriate responses. The heavy oak doors to the royal suite stood closed, their ornate bronze handles gleaming in the torchlight. Marcus could hear movement within, the sound of heavy objects being moved or overturned. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Protocol demanded that he announce himself and request permission to enter, but the Queen's current state might make normal procedures ineffective. Instead, he pressed his ear to the door, trying to discern the nature of the disturbance. Queen Isabella's voice reached him, muffled but clearly agitated, speaking rapidly in what sounded like a one-sided conversation. Her words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakably distressed, alternating between anger and what might have been fear. Marcus had witnessed the Queen handle countless crises with remarkable composure. She had negotiated peace treaties, managed court intrigue, and maintained diplomatic relationships with neighboring kingdoms through charm and intelligence. This level of emotional volatility was completely out of character, suggesting either a threat of unprecedented severity or a personal crisis of devastating proportions. The captain stepped back from the door and considered his options. He could summon the king, but that might escalate the situation if the Queen was indeed suffering from some form of mental distress. He could attempt to enter alone, but that would violate protocol and potentially put both himself and the Queen in an awkward position. He could wait for the situation to resolve itself, but the increasing volume of the disturbance suggested that was unlikely. As he debated his course of action, footsteps approached from the main corridor. Marcus turned to see Sir William Ashford, the king's personal bodyguard, and Marcus's second-in-command, striding toward him with obvious purpose. The older knight's scarred face was grim, his silver hair gleaming in the flickering torchlight. "Captain," Sir William said in his gravelly voice, "Lieutenant Hayes sent word that there's been some disturbance. The kitchen staff is reporting unusual sounds from the royal wing, and several courtiers have asked about increased guard presence." Marcus cursed silently. Palace gossip spread faster than wildfire, and news of the Queen's condition would reach unfriendly ears within hours if they weren't careful. The kingdom's enemies would seize upon any sign of weakness or instability within the royal family. "The Queen has been under considerable strain," Marcus replied carefully, choosing his words to convey the seriousness of the situation without revealing specific details. "We need to ensure her privacy while maintaining security. Can you personally verify the positions of all external guards? I want to know exactly who has access to this wing tonight." Sir William nodded understanding. The veteran knight had served through enough palace crises to read between the lines of diplomatic language. "Already done, Captain. The perimeter is secure, and I've had Lieutenant Hayes assign our most trusted men to the internal posts. But there is one complication, which is Prince Alexander returned early from his evening ride. He's asking to see his mother, and he's not accepting the usual excuses about royal obligations. The boy may be young, but he's perceptive. He knows something's wrong." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Protecting the royal family often meant protecting them from each other, shielding them from harsh realities that could undermine their ability to rule effectively. But Prince Alexander was no longer a child, and his growing awareness of palace dynamics made him both an asset and a potential complication. Another crash came from within the Queen's chambers, this one loud enough to echo down the corridor. Both guards tensed, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. The sound was followed by Queen Isabella's voice, raised in what was unmistakably a shout of rage or frustration. "That decides it," Marcus said firmly. "I'm going in. If the Queen is having some sort of medical emergency, delay could be fatal. If she's responding to a genuine threat, I need to assess the situation immediately." Sir William looked troubled, but nodded agreement. "What about the king? Send a discreet message. Tell him there's been a minor incident requiring his attention, but stress that it's not an immediate emergency. We don't want him rushing here in a panic and making things worse." As Sir William departed to carry out his orders, Marcus approached the Queen's door once more. He could hear Isabella moving around inside, her voice continuing in that strange, agitated monologue. Taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly on the oak panels. "Your Majesty," he called out, his voice respectful but carrying enough authority to penetrate her distressed state. "This is Captain Thorne. I need to verify your safety and well-being." The sounds within the chamber stopped abruptly, followed by complete silence that was somehow more unnerving than the previous commotion. Marcus waited, counting heartbeats, before trying again. "Your Majesty, palace security requires that I confirm your condition. Please respond so that I may report your safety to His Majesty." "Go away." The Queen's voice came through the door with startling clarity, high-pitched and strained. "I know what you're all trying to do. I won't let you destroy everything I've built." Marcus exchanged glances with the two guards who had quietly taken positions flanking the door. The Queen's words suggested paranoid delusions, but they could also indicate knowledge of an actual conspiracy. In his experience, the difference between justified suspicion and mental instability often lay in details that only careful investigation could reveal. "Your Majesty," he tried once more, "I am here only to ensure your protection. If there is any threat to your safety or the security of the crown, please allow me to assist you." The response came as another crash, followed by what sounded like books or papers being scattered across the floor. Then, unexpectedly, the door handle turned, and Queen Isabella appeared in the doorway. Marcus had seen the Queen in various states over the years, tired after long diplomatic sessions, worried during times of crisis, angry when dealing with particularly stubborn courtiers. But he had never seen her like this. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her elaborate court dress wrinkled and stained, her carefully arranged hair falling loose around her shoulders. Dark circles ringed her eyes, which held a wild, desperate quality that made the seasoned soldier instinctively step back. But it was what she held in her trembling hands that truly shocked him. Queen Isabella clutched a leather-bound journal that Marcus recognized as belonging to the late Queen Mother, Edmund's beloved mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. The journal had been kept in the royal archive, a treasured family heirloom that was rarely handled except during ceremonial occasions. "You want to know what's wrong?" Isabella demanded, her voice carrying an edge of hysteria. "You want to know why I can't trust anyone in this palace anymore? Read this." She thrust the journal toward Marcus, its aged pages fluttering in her shaking grip. The captain could see handwritten entries in the late Queen Mother's distinctive script, but the distance and poor lighting made the actual words illegible. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this in private, away from the corridor. If there's information that concerns the security of the realm, we should handle it with appropriate discretion." Isabella laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Discretion? It's too late for discretion, Captain. The damage has already been done. 20 years of lies, 20 years of deception, and I'm the last to know." The implications of her words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Whatever was in that journal, it had shattered Queen Isabella's worldview so completely that she was questioning everything she had believed about her life and marriage. The potential ramifications for the kingdom were staggering. As Marcus struggled to find the right words to de-escalate the situation, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. King Edmund appeared, still dressed in his formal court attire from the meeting with Chancellor Aldrich. His face showed confusion and concern as he took in the scene, his disheveled wife standing in the doorway of her chambers, clutching an ancient journal, while the captain of the royal guard stood at obvious attention. "Isabella," the king called out, his voice gentle but carrying an undertone of authority. "Lady Catherine said you weren't feeling well. What's troubling you, my dear?" The Queen's reaction was immediate and explosive. Her face contorted with rage, and she raised the journal like a weapon, pointing it accusingly at her husband. "Don't you dare call me my dear," she shrieked, her voice echoing throughout the wing. "Not when I know what you've done. Not when I know what you've hidden from me all these years." King Edmund's face went pale, his eyes darting between his wife's furious expression and the journal in her hands. Marcus watched the king's reaction carefully, noting the way Edmund's shoulders sagged slightly, as if under an enormous weight. Whatever was in that journal, King Edmund knew exactly what it contained. The confrontation that Marcus had been dreading was about to unfold, and he realized that his role as protector of the royal family might be about to become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The silence that followed Queen Isabella's accusation stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of 20 years of marriage suddenly. called into question. King Edmund stood frozen in the corridor, his usually commanding presence diminished by the shock, and guilt written plainly across his weathered features. Marcus felt the uncomfortable sensation of witnessing something deeply private, yet his duty demanded he remain present to ensure the safety of both monarchs. "Isabella, please," King Edmund said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not here. Not like this. Let's discuss this privately." The queen's laughter was harsh and bitter, echoing off the stone walls like the cry of a wounded animal. "Privately? We've had 20 years of privacy, Edmund, and you've used every moment of it to lie to me." She waved the journal above her head like a banner of war. "Your mother wrote everything down, every detail, every conversation, every decision made behind my back." Marcus caught Sir William's eye and nodded slightly toward the far end of the corridor. Other guards had begun to appear, drawn by the commotion, and several courtiers had emerged from their chambers to investigate the disturbance. Word of this confrontation would spread through the palace within the hour if they didn't contain the situation immediately. "Clear the corridor," Marcus ordered quietly to Sir William, who immediately began directing the other guards to move observers away from the royal wing. The veteran knight understood the importance of maintaining the royal family's dignity, even in their darkest moments. King Edmund took a tentative step toward his wife, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Isabella, my love, whatever you think you've discovered, we can work through it together. We always have. Always." The queen's voice cracked with emotion. "You call our entire marriage a lie working together? You call letting me believe that our love story was real working together?" The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Marcus felt his own heart sink as he began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. The royal marriage of Valdoria was not merely a personal relationship. It was the foundation of political alliances, trade agreements, and the very legitimacy of Prince Alexander's claim to the throne. If that foundation was built on deception, the consequences could destabilize the entire kingdom. Queen Isabella opened the journal with shaking hands and began to read aloud, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Royal Planning Committee meeting, 3 months before the royal wedding. Quote, Edmund expressed reservations about proceeding with the arranged marriage to Princess Isabella of Montclair, citing his existing emotional attachment to Lady Eleanor Ravencrest. Chancellor Aldrich reminded His Majesty that the political alliance with Montclair was essential for securing the northern trade routes and preventing war with the mountain clans. King Edmund's face had gone completely white, and Marcus saw his monarch's hands clench into fists at his sides. The revelation was devastating. Not only had the king's marriage been arranged for political purposes, which was common enough among royalty, but he had apparently been in love with someone else at the time. "Isabella, please stop," Edmund pleaded, glancing nervously at Marcus and the remaining guards. "This isn't the time or place for what?" Isabella interrupted savagely. "For the truth? For finally admitting that our entire life together has been an elaborate performance for the good of the kingdom." She flipped several pages in the journal, her movements sharp and angry. "Oh, but it gets better, my darling husband. Listen to this entry from 6 months after our wedding. Edmund continues to meet secretly with Lady Eleanor. I have advised discretion, but young men in love rarely listen to reason. The Queen seems unaware of these meetings, which is fortunate given her growing influence in court." Marcus felt as though he had been punched in the stomach. Not only had King Edmund married Queen Isabella under false pretenses, but he had continued his relationship with another woman during the early months of their marriage. The implications were staggering. If this information became public, it could provide grounds for annulment, questions about Prince Alexander's legitimacy, and political chaos that would take generations to resolve. "My lady," Marcus interjected carefully, "perhaps we should move this discussion to more private quarters. There are matters of state security to consider." Queen Isabella turned her wild gaze upon him, and Marcus was struck by the depth of pain and betrayal he saw there. This was not merely a woman scorned. This was a queen discovering that her entire life had been built upon lies. "State security?" She laughed bitterly. "What about the security of my heart, Captain? What about the security of a woman who gave everything to a man who was pretending to love her?" She turned back to her husband, the journal clutched against her chest like armor. "Do you know what the worst part is, Edmund? It's not that you loved someone else when we married. It's not even that you continued to see her after our wedding. It's that you made me believe I was special. You made me believe that what we had was real." Tears began to stream down the Queen's face. and Marcus felt his own throat tighten with sympathy. He had watched this woman navigate complex diplomatic situations with grace, had seen her comfort grieving subjects with genuine compassion, had observed her fierce protection of Prince Alexander. To see her so broken was genuinely heartbreaking. King Edmund seemed to crumble under the weight of his wife's words. He reached out toward her, then let his hand fall to his side when she stepped back. It was real, Isabella. Whatever started as political necessity became something genuine. I did learn to love you, learn to love me. The Queen's voice rose to nearly a shriek. Like a lesson in statecraft? Like memorizing trade agreements and tax codes? That's not what I meant, Edmund said desperately. Isabella, please, you must understand the pressures I was under. The kingdom was facing threats from multiple directions. The marriage alliance with Montclair was the only thing standing between us and war. And Lady Eleanor? Isabella demanded, opening the journal again. What about your existing emotional attachment to her? Did that just disappear when duty called? The king's silence was answer enough. Marcus watched as Queen Isabella's face crumpled with the weight of understanding. Whatever relationship had existed between King Edmund and Lady Eleanor, it had clearly been significant enough to be documented by the Queen Mother as a potential problem. She died, Edmund said quietly, his voice barely audible. Eleanor died of fever 2 years after our marriage. Our friendship ended long before that. Friendship, Isabella repeated, her voice flat and emotionless. Is that what we're calling it? Marcus realized that he was witnessing the disintegration of not just a marriage, but potentially the stability of the entire kingdom. The royal couple's relationship had always been held up as a model of partnership and mutual respect. Foreign ambassadors spoke enviously of the Valdorian monarchs' obvious affection for each other. If that image was shattered, it would affect everything from trade negotiations to military alliances. Your Majesty, Marcus said, addressing the Queen directly, I understand that you've received shocking information, but perhaps there's more to discuss before drawing final conclusions. 20 years of marriage, the birth of Prince Alexander, the challenges you've faced together. Surely these experiences have created genuine bonds. Queen Isabella looked at him with something approaching pity. Captain Thorne, you're a good man, and you've served our family with honor. But you don't understand what it's like to discover that your entire adult life has been built on a foundation of lies. Every loving word, every shared moment, every time I thought we were building something together as equals, all of it poisoned by the knowledge that I was never his first choice. She opened the journal once more, her voice becoming cold and clinical as she read. Final entry regarding the Eleanor situation, written 1 year before Prince Alexander's birth. The king has finally ceased his visits to Lady Eleanor's family estate. Her marriage to Lord Blackwood appears to have resolved the matter permanently. Queen Isabella remains unaware of the relationship, and I believe it best to keep it that way. The royal marriage has developed into a stable partnership, even if it lacks the passion the king once felt for his former attachment. The words hit the corridor like physical blows. Marcus saw King Edmund actually stagger as if he had been struck. The revelation that Lady Eleanor had eventually married someone else suggested that King Edmund's attachment to her had persisted far longer than a mere few months after his royal wedding. A stable partnership, Queen Isabella repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. That's all I ever was to you. A political convenience who happened to provide you with an heir. Isabella, no, King Edmund said, finally, finding his voice. You're wrong. Yes, the marriage began as political necessity, and yes, I had feelings for Eleanor when we wed. But those feelings faded, and what grew between us was real. Our love for Alexander, our shared experiences, the respect we developed for each other. None of that was fake. The Queen stared at her husband for a long moment, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. Respect, she said finally. Shared experiences. The love of our son. You're describing a business partnership, Edmund, not a marriage. That's not fair, the king protested. You know there was more between us than that. The private moments, the conversations, the way we worked together to solve problems, you felt it too. I know you did. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw uncertainty flicker in the Queen's eyes, as if she was reconsidering her position. But then, her expression hardened again, and she shook her head. Maybe I felt something, but how can I trust those feelings now? How can I trust any memory when I know you were pretending all along? Every time you said you loved me, was that genuine, or were you just playing your role as the dutiful king? The question hung in the air unanswered, and Marcus realized that even King Edmund might not know the truth. When duty and emotion become so intertwined over decades, when political necessity requires the performance of love, the line between genuine feeling and careful acting can become impossibly blurred. Prince Alexander's voice suddenly echoed from the far end of the corridor. Mother? Father? What's happening? All three adults turned to see the young prince approaching, his face creased with worry. At 16, Alexander had inherited his father's height and his mother's intelligence, along with an unfortunate tendency to appear at the worst possible moments. Marcus cursed silently. The last thing this situation needed was the heir to the throne witnessing his parents' marriage fall apart. Alexander, go back to your chambers, King Edmund commanded, his voice strained. Your mother and I are having a private discussion. But the prince had already seen too much. His eyes moved from his mother's tear-stained face to the journal in her hands to his father's obvious distress. This isn't a discussion, he said quietly. This is a fight. What's in that book, mother? Queen Isabella looked at her son, and Marcus saw her internal struggle play out across her features. The maternal instinct to protect Alexander from painful truths warred with her desire to finally stop living a lie. The truth, she said finally, her voice hollow. The truth about your parents' marriage, about the foundation of this entire kingdom, about everything we've taught you to believe about love and honor and duty. The prince's eyes widened, and Marcus realized that the young man was intelligent enough to understand the implications of his mother's words. If the royal marriage was revealed to be a sham, it would call into question everything Prince Alexander had been taught about ruling and leadership. Perhaps, Marcus said carefully, we should move this conversation to the private family chambers. The corridor is too exposed for such sensitive discussions. But, even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The damage had been done, the truth had been spoken, and the reverberations would spread throughout the palace and beyond. The kingdom of Valdoria was about to face its greatest crisis in living memory, and it would begin with the complete destruction of everything its people believed about their royal family. As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, Chancellor Aldrich appeared at the end of the corridor, his elderly frame moving with surprising speed. His weathered face was creased with worry, and Marcus realized that news of the disturbance had already reached the king's closest advisors. Your Majesty, the Chancellor called out, there are urgent matters requiring your attention. The eastern provinces have reported strange movement along the borders, and the ambassadors from Northmark are requesting an immediate audience. The irony was almost cruel. Just as the royal family was tearing itself apart, external threats were demanding their attention. Marcus wondered if this timing was coincidental or if someone had orchestrated events to create maximum chaos for the kingdom. Queen Isabella looked from the Chancellor to her husband to her son, and then, directly at Marcus. What now, Captain? She asked, her voice eerily calm. How do you protect a kingdom when its very foundation is built on lies? Marcus felt the weight of Queen Isabella's questions settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. As captain of the royal guard, he had sworn an oath to protect the crown. But what happened when the crown itself became the source of the kingdom's greatest threat? The Queen's revelation had created a crisis that no amount of military training could have prepared him for. Chancellor Aldrich approached slowly, his keen eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of a man who had served the crown for 40 years. The old advisor had weathered palace coups, foreign invasions, and succession crises, but Marcus could see uncertainty in his usually confident demeanor. Your Majesties, Aldrich said carefully, perhaps we should postpone any further discussions until the immediate diplomatic concerns are addressed. The Northmark ambassadors seemed quite urgent, and delaying their audience could have significant implications for our northern trade agreements. Queen Isabella laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. Trade agreements? You want to discuss trade agreements while our marriage crumbles, and our son learns that his entire heritage is built on deception. Prince Alexander stepped forward, his young face set with determination that reminded Marcus painfully of both his parents. I'm not a child anymore. If there's something I need to know about our family, about the kingdom, then tell me. I can handle the truth. King Edmund looked at his son with a mixture of pride and anguish. Alexander, there are complexities to ruling that can't be simplified into easy answers. Sometimes the good of the kingdom requires personal sacrifices that— Stop, the prince interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone present. Just stop with the political speeches, father. I've been preparing my entire life to inherit this crown. I know about duty and sacrifice and the greater good. What I don't know is whether anything you've taught me about honor and truth actually means anything." The words hit King Edmund like a physical blow. Marcus watched as the monarch seemed to age years in a matter of seconds, the weight of his son's disillusionment adding to his already crushing burden. Chancellor Aldrich cleared his throat delicately. "Perhaps we should consider the practical implications of this situation. If word of these revelations were to spread beyond the royal family, it could create significant instability. The eastern provinces have already been restless due to the grain shortages, and any perception of weakness in the royal line could encourage rebellion." Queen Isabella turned on the elderly advisor with sudden fury. "Instability? Weakness? Are you suggesting that I keep quiet about my husband's deception for the good of the kingdom? That I continue to live a lie to maintain the illusion of royal perfection?" "I'm suggesting," Aldrich replied with diplomatic precision, "that hasty decisions made in emotional moments rarely serve anyone's best interests, least of all the people who depend on stable governance." Marcus found himself caught between admiration for the Chancellor's pragmatic wisdom and sympathy for the Queen's emotional devastation. Both perspectives had merit, but they seemed impossible to reconcile. Sir William appeared at Marcus's elbow, his scarred face grim. "Captain," he murmured quietly, "Lieutenant Hayes reports unusual activity in the servants' quarters. Word of the disturbance is spreading, and several kitchen staff are asking whether they should prepare separate meals for their majesties. Also, the Northmark ambassadors have been joined by representatives from 2 other kingdoms. This wasn't a scheduled diplomatic gathering." The implications hit Marcus immediately. Multiple foreign ambassadors arriving unannounced, strange border movements, and now the royal family in crisis. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was orchestrating events to destabilize Valdoria, and they had chosen their moment with devastating precision. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, addressing King Edmund directly, "Sir William reports that multiple foreign delegations have arrived unexpectedly. Combined with the border movements Chancellor Aldrich mentioned, this suggests a coordinated effort to test our kingdom's stability. We may be facing more than a family crisis." King Edmund straightened slightly, his royal training taking over despite his personal anguish. "What kind of coordinated effort?" "Unknown at this time," Marcus replied. "But the timing is highly suspicious. If someone wanted to create maximum chaos for Valdoria, striking when the royal family is divided would be tactically sound." Queen Isabella looked up sharply from the journal she still clutched. "You think someone orchestrated this? Arrange for me to find this information at the exact moment when other threats emerged." Marcus chose his words carefully. "The journal has been in the royal archive for years. Someone would have needed access to both the archive and knowledge of its contents to use it as a weapon. They would also need to coordinate with external forces to create multiple pressure points simultaneously." Prince Alexander's face had gone pale as he grasped the implications. "You're saying someone in the palace, someone we trust, might be working with our enemies?" "It's one possibility we need to consider," Marcus admitted. "But first, we need to address the immediate threats. Personal grievances will have to wait until the kingdom is secure." Queen Isabella's eyes flashed with renewed anger. "Personal grievances? Is that what you call discovering that my entire adult life has been a performance for the good of the state?" "Isabella," King Edmund said quietly, "the captain is right. Whatever needs to be resolved between us, it has to wait. If Valdoria falls while we're fighting each other, none of our personal concerns will matter." The queen stared at her husband for a long moment, and Marcus could see the internal battle raging behind her eyes. The woman who had helped rule a kingdom for 20 years understood the logic of putting state concerns first, but the wife who had just discovered her marriage was built on lies rebelled against setting aside her pain once again. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold and controlled. "But this conversation isn't over, Edmund. When this crisis passes, we will finish what we started tonight, and nothing will ever be the same between us." King Edmund nodded, accepting the inevitable reckoning that awaited him. "I understand. But right now, we need to present a united front. If our enemies sense division in the royal family, they'll exploit it ruthlessly." Chancellor Aldrich stepped forward with visible relief. "Shall I arrange for the foreign delegations to be received in the main throne room? A display of royal unity might discourage any thoughts of taking advantage of perceived weakness." "Yes," King Edmund agreed, then looked at his wife and son. "But first, we need to discuss how to handle this as a family. Whatever our private concerns, we must appear unified in public." Prince Alexander spoke up with surprising maturity. What about the journal? If someone arranged for Mother to find it tonight, they might have copies or other evidence they're planning to use against us. Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young prince's strategic thinking. Despite his emotional turmoil, Alexander was already considering the tactical implications of the situation. Queen Isabella looked down at the leather-bound book in her hands, then up at the faces surrounding her. There could be other documentation. Your grandmother was meticulous about recording everything that happened in court. If this journal survived, there might be others. Then, we need to secure the archives immediately, Marcus decided. Sir William, take a team and lock down the entire royal library. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization. Already done, Sir William replied with grim satisfaction. I took the liberty of posting guards there as soon as the situation became clear. But, Captain, there's something else you need to know. Marcus tensed, sensing that more bad news was coming. Lady Eleanor Ravencrest, Sir William continued. Her family name has appeared on several diplomatic communications over the past month. Her son, Lord Michael Ravencrest, has been serving as an intermediary for some of the foreign delegations that arrived tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt the pieces of a complex conspiracy beginning to fall into place, creating a picture that was far more threatening than a simple family crisis. Eleanor had a son, Queen Isabella said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. King Edmund's face had gone completely white. Michael was born 3 years after our marriage. There's no way. I never. Are you certain? The Queen asked, her eyes boring into her husband's. Given what I've learned tonight about your honesty, are you absolutely certain? The implications were staggering. If Lord Michael Ravencrest was King Edmund's son, he would have a potential claim to the Valdorian throne. Combined with foreign backing and evidence of the royal marriage's deceptive foundation, he could present himself as a legitimate alternative to Prince Alexander's succession. Chancellor Aldrich was already thinking ahead. If Lord Ravencrest has been coordinating with foreign powers and has documentation suggesting legitimacy, he could be preparing to challenge Prince Alexander's inheritance. The timing of tonight's revelations would make perfect sense as the opening move in a succession crisis. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. What had begun as a family argument was revealing itself as a carefully orchestrated attempt to destabilize the entire kingdom. The question was whether they could respond effectively while the royal family was already fractured from within. We need more information, he declared. And we need it quickly. Sir William, send Lieutenant Hayes to gather intelligence on Lord Ravencrest's activities over the past month. I want to know everywhere he's been, everyone he's met with, and any communications he's sent or received. What about the foreign delegations? Prince Alexander asked. Shouldn't we meet with them to find out what they want? King Edmund shook his head. Not yet. First, we need to understand the full scope of what we're facing. If Michael is indeed challenging the succession, we need to know our legal and political position before we engage with potential foreign supporters of his claim. Queen Isabella spoke up, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil she was clearly experiencing. There's something else we need to consider. If Eleanor's son is 23 years old, and if Edmund had any relationship with Eleanor after our marriage. She paused, her eyes meeting her husband's. The timing would make it possible that he is legitimate, at least in the technical sense. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus realized that they weren't just facing a political conspiracy, they were potentially facing a legitimate challenge to Prince Alexander's right to inherit the crown. We need those archives secured and searched immediately, Marcus commanded. If there's any documentation regarding the king's relationship with Lady Eleanor, we need to find it before our enemies can use it against us. As the group prepared to move toward the royal library, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were already several steps behind their opponents. Whoever had orchestrated this crisis had planned it with devastating precision, striking at the royal family's most vulnerable moment and creating multiple pressure points that would be difficult to address simultaneously. The question now was whether the kingdom of Valdoria could survive the truth about its royal family, and whether King Edmund could hold his crown when faced with the consequences of choices he had made decades earlier. Marcus only hoped that his oath to protect the crown would prove strong enough to weather the storm that was about to engulf them all. The royal library stood like a cathedral of knowledge in the heart of the palace, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadows cast by flickering torches mounted along the stone walls. Ancient tapestries depicting the kingdom's history hung between towering shelves that reached toward the darkness above, creating an atmosphere both reverent and oppressive. Marcus led the procession through the heavy oak doors, his hand instinctively resting on his sword hilt as they entered the repository of Valdoria's most sensitive secrets. Sir William's guards had already secured the chamber, their positions carefully chosen to monitor every entrance and exit. The archives section, where the royal family's private documents were stored, occupied a separate wing accessible only through a narrow corridor lined with portraits of past monarchs. Each painted face seemed to watch their approach with knowing eyes, as if the departed rulers were aware of the crisis threatening to tear their dynasty apart. The Queen Mother's journals are kept in the third alcove, Chancellor Aldrich informed them, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. She maintained detailed records from the time of her marriage to King Edmund's father until her death 3 years ago. If there are other documents relevant to tonight's revelations, they would be housed in the same collection. Queen Isabella moved ahead of the group with purpose, the journal that had started everything still clutched in her hands like evidence of a crime. Her earlier hysteria had been replaced by a cold determination that Marcus found somehow more unsettling than her emotional outburst. This version of the Queen reminded him of the diplomatic negotiator who could dissect complex treaties and identify weaknesses that others had missed. Prince Alexander followed close behind his mother, his young face set with grim resolve. The revelation that he might have a half-brother with potential claim to the throne had transformed the prince from a sheltered royal heir into something approaching a warrior preparing for battle. Marcus noted with approval that the boy's hand had unconsciously moved to mirror his own sword position, suggesting that training instincts were beginning to override emotional shock. The alcove containing the Queen Mother's personal documents was secured behind an ornate iron gate that required 2 separate keys to open. Chancellor Aldrich produced one from his official seal, while King Edmund provided the other from a chain he wore around his neck. The symbolic act of both men working together to unlock the royal family's secrets felt heavy with portent. Inside the alcove, dozens of leather-bound volumes lined the shelves in meticulous chronological order. Each journal was labeled with dates covering specific years of the Queen Mother's life, creating a comprehensive record of royal family events spanning nearly 5 decades. The scope of the documentation was both impressive and terrifying. Somewhere in these pages lay the complete truth about King Edmund's relationship with Eleanor Ravencrest and its potential consequences for the kingdom. "We need to focus our search," Marcus said, taking charge of the investigation. "Sir William, take the journals covering the years immediately before and after the royal marriage. Chancellor Aldrich, examine the period when Lord Michael Ravencrest was born. Your Majesties, perhaps you could review the volumes from the years following Prince Alexander's birth, looking for any references to ongoing concerns about the succession." Queen Isabella selected a journal from the shelf with hands that trembled slightly despite her outward composure. "There should also be correspondence," she said quietly. Mother Edmund maintained extensive communication with noble families throughout the kingdom. If Eleanor continued to be a concern after her marriage to Lord Blackwood, there would be letters. As they began their systematic search, the library fell into an eerie silence broken only by the whisper of turning pages and the occasional sharp intake of breath when someone discovered a particularly revealing passage. Marcus found himself watching the royal family's faces as they uncovered layer after layer of deception and political maneuvering that had shaped their lives without their knowledge. King Edmund was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Here," he said, holding up a journal dated 5 years after his marriage to Isabella. "Listen to this. Edmund's continued correspondence with Eleanor has become a source of concern. While the letters themselves appear innocent enough, their frequency suggests an emotional attachment that could prove problematic. I have advised terminating all contact, but the king insists that maintaining diplomatic relationships with the Ravencrest family is politically necessary." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication throughout the group. Prince Alexander looked up from his own reading, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hurt and growing anger. "Diplomatic relationships? Is that what you called it, father?" Before King Edmund could respond, Chancellor Aldrich made a discovery that shifted everyone's attention. "There's a sealed packet here," he announced, pulling a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth from behind a row of journals. "It's labeled for the Chancellor's eyes only, to be opened in the event of succession crisis." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Queen Mother had anticipated this moment, had prepared for the possibility that her son's past would eventually threaten the kingdom's stability. Whatever was in that packet, it represented her final attempt to protect the crown she had served for so many years. "Open it," Queen Isabella commanded, her voice carrying the authority of a monarch despite her personal anguish. We need to know what she thought important enough to hide. Chancellor Aldrich's weathered hands worked carefully at the wax seal that had protected the packet's contents for 3 years. Inside, they found a collection of letters written in the Queen Mother's careful script, along with several documents that appeared to be copies of official correspondence. The first letter was addressed to the Chancellor himself, and Aldrich read it aloud with growing amazement. "My dear friend," the Queen Mother had written, "if you are reading this, then the secrets I have kept to protect my son and his kingdom have finally come to light. I pray that you will use the information I have gathered to preserve the crown, even if it means revealing truths that will cause great pain to those I love most." The Chancellor's voice wavered as he continued reading. "The relationship between Edmund and Eleanor Ravencrest was more serious than I allowed anyone to know. They were secretly married in a private ceremony conducted by Father Benedict at the monastery of St. Aldwyn 6 months before Edmund's arranged marriage to Princess Isabella. The union was never consummated due to Eleanor's sudden departure for the Northern Territories, and Father Benedict agreed to keep the ceremony secret to prevent a diplomatic crisis with Montclair. The revelation hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Queen Isabella made a sound that was half gasp, half sob, while Prince Alexander went completely rigid with shock. King Edmund appeared to be having difficulty breathing, his face cycling through expressions of guilt, fear, and resignation. "There's more," Chancellor Aldrich continued grimly. "Eleanor's son Michael was indeed fathered by Edmund during one of their secret meetings after the king's official marriage. The boy's true parentage has been hidden by claiming that he was born prematurely during Eleanor's marriage to Lord Blackwood, but records kept by the monastery physician confirm the actual timing of his birth. Marcus felt the foundations of his world crumbling beneath him. Not only was King Edmund's marriage to Queen Isabella built on deception, but his relationship with Eleanor Ravencrest had been so serious that it included both a secret marriage ceremony and the birth of an illegitimate heir. The political and legal implications were staggering. "Is the secret marriage legally binding?" Prince Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chancellor Aldrich was already examining another document from the packet. According to this legal analysis prepared by the Queen Mother's personal attorney, the ceremony would be considered valid under church law, but potentially invalid under royal succession statutes due to lack of proper witness and formal registration. However, the question would ultimately be decided by the Royal Council, and such decisions often depend more on political factors than strict legal interpretation. Queen Isabella had gone very still, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the library walls. "So, I might not even be legally married," she said finally. 20 years, a son, a kingdom ruled together, and I might be nothing more than a royal mistress who happened to wear a crown. "Isabella, no," King Edmund said desperately. "Whatever the technical legal status, our marriage has been recognized by the church, by the kingdom, by foreign powers. You are the queen, Alexander is my legitimate heir, and nothing can change that." "Can't it?" Prince Alexander asked, standing up abruptly. "If Lord Ravencrest can prove his parentage and challenge the validity of Mother's marriage, doesn't that give him a stronger claim to the throne than mine?" The question hung in the air unanswered, because everyone in the room knew that succession crises had been fought over far less compelling evidence. With foreign powers apparently backing Lord Ravencrest's challenge and documentation supporting his claims, the kingdom faced the very real possibility of civil war. Sir William spoke up from his position near the library entrance. "Captain, Lieutenant Hayes is requesting immediate audience. He says there are developments that can't wait for our investigation to conclude." Marcus nodded grimly. Events were moving faster than they could process, and their enemies weren't going to wait for the royal family to come to terms with their internal crisis. "Send him in." Lieutenant Hayes entered the library with obvious urgency, his usually composed demeanor strained with stress. "Captain, the foreign delegations have issued an ultimatum. They demand an immediate audience with King Edmund, and they've specifically requested that Lord Michael Ravencrest be present as an advisor to the negotiations." "An advisor?" Queen Isabella laughed bitterly. "They mean as an alternative candidate for the throne." "That would be my assessment as well, Your Majesty," Hayes replied respectfully. "But there's more. Our scouts report that significant military forces are massing on our borders with both Northmark and the eastern provinces. If this is a coordinated challenge to the crown, we may be facing invasion as well as internal succession crisis." Marcus felt the weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. As captain of the royal guard, his primary duty was protecting the royal family. But that duty became complex when the family itself was fracturing and external enemies were threatening the kingdom. Every decision he made in the next few hours could determine whether Valdoria survived as a unified nation. "How much time do we have before the delegations expect a response?" he asked Hayes. "They've requested an audience at dawn, Captain. That gives us perhaps 4 hours to prepare." King Edmund stood slowly, seeming to draw strength from the crisis that threatened to overwhelm them. "Then, we need to make a decision about how to proceed. Do we acknowledge the legitimacy of Lord Ravencrest's claims and attempt to negotiate a peaceful resolution, or do we reject them entirely and prepare for conflict?" "There's a third option," Prince Alexander said quietly, surprising everyone with his composure. "We could demand proof of the accusations before responding to any ultimatums. Force them to present their evidence publicly, and then address each claim systematically." Marcus looked at the young prince with new respect. Despite his emotional turmoil, Alexander was thinking strategically about the kingdom's best interests rather than simply reacting to personal betrayal. "The prince raises a good point," Chancellor Aldrich agreed. "If we can control the narrative and force our enemies to justify their claims, we maintain more options for response." Queen Isabella closed the journal she had been reading and looked directly at her husband. "Before we can present any kind of united front, we need to settle the question between us. Edmund, I want the complete truth about your relationship with Eleanor Ravencrest. Not the political version, not the diplomatic interpretation, but the absolute truth. Our kingdom's survival may depend on understanding exactly what we're dealing with." King Edmund met his wife's gaze steadily, and Marcus saw a man who had finally decided to stop hiding from the consequences of his past choices. Whatever happened next, the kingdom of Valdoria was about to learn whether truth or deception would prove stronger in the face of existential crisis. The torches burned lower in their sconces as King Edmund stood before his family and closest advisors, the weight of 2 decades of secrets visible in every line of his weathered face. The library around them felt like a courtroom where the final judgment was about to be rendered, not just on a king's personal choices, but on the fate of an entire kingdom. "You want the complete truth," Edmund said quietly, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had carried too heavy a burden for too long. "Very well. Eleanor and I were childhood friends who became lovers when we came of age. We believed ourselves to be destined for each other, young and foolish enough to think love could overcome political necessity." Marcus watched Queen Isabella's face carefully, noting how she maintained her composure despite the pain that flickered behind her eyes. This was the woman who had negotiated peace treaties and managed court intrigue. She would hear her husband's confession with the same steel that had made her an effective queen. "The secret ceremony," King Edmund continued, "was Eleanor's idea. She believed that if we were married in God's eyes, no political arrangement could truly separate us. I was weak enough to agree, telling myself that it would somehow make the arranged marriage to Isabella more bearable if I knew my heart belonged elsewhere." Prince Alexander shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling to reconcile the father he had admired with this story of deception and betrayal. "But you went through with the marriage to Mother anyway. You stood in the cathedral before the entire kingdom and made vows you knew were false." "Yes," Edmund admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself it was for the good of the kingdom. That personal happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford as king. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't bring myself to reject the alliance with Montclair and risk war, even for love." Queen Isabella spoke for the first time since demanding the truth, her voice surprisingly steady. "And Eleanor? Did she accept your choice gracefully?" King Edmund's face crumpled with remembered pain. "She was devastated. She accused me of using her, of never truly loving her if I could abandon her for political convenience. She left for the Northern Territories immediately after our wedding, swearing she would never see me again." "But she did see you again," Chancellor Aldrich interjected, consulting the documents they had discovered. "According to these records, you met secretly on multiple occasions during the first 2 years of your marriage to Queen Isabella." The admission seemed to physically pain the king. Eleanor's father arranged for her marriage to Lord Blackwood, but she couldn't bring herself to go through with it without saying goodbye properly. She sent word through intermediaries, and I... He paused, struggling with the words. "I told myself that one final meeting would provide closure for both of us." "One final meeting," Queen Isabella repeated, her voice dripping with bitter irony. which became multiple meetings over 2 years. And during one of these farewells, you conceived a child. King Edmund nodded miserably. We both knew it was wrong. We both knew it could destroy everything we had built separately. But grief and lost love can make people desperate, and desperate people make terrible choices. Marcus found himself thinking about the tactical implications of these revelations. Lord Michael Ravencrest wasn't just a political rival. He was the product of a genuine love affair that had persisted despite royal obligations. That emotional foundation would make him a more compelling claimant to the throne than a mere ambitious noble seeking power. When did you learn about Michael? Prince Alexander asked, his voice carefully controlled. Not until after Eleanor's marriage to Lord Blackwood, Edmund replied. She sent one final letter informing me that I had a son, but that she never wanted to see me again. She made it clear that if I ever attempted to contact her or acknowledge the child, she would reveal everything and destroy both our kingdoms. The silence that followed stretched like a taut rope threatening to snap. Marcus could see each person processing the implications of a royal heir who had grown up knowing his true parentage but forbidden from claiming his birthright. Sir William cleared his throat respectfully. Your Majesty, if Lord Ravencrest has carried this knowledge for 20 years, his appearance now with foreign backing suggests careful long-term planning rather than opportunistic advantage-taking. Which means he's dangerous, Marcus concluded grimly. A man who has spent decades preparing to claim what he believes is rightfully his will not be easily deterred or negotiated with. Queen Isabella stood slowly, her movements carrying the regal bearing that 20 years of ruling had made instinctive. The question now is not what Edmund did 20 years ago, but what we do in the next few hours. This kingdom faces invasion, civil war, and the collapse of the royal line. Personal grievances will have to wait until we determine whether there's still a crown worth fighting over. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the Queen's ability to compartmentalize her personal pain in favor of state necessity. This was the diplomatic skill that had made her such an effective ruler, even if her marriage had been built on deception. Prince Alexander moved to stand beside his mother, his young face set with determination that reminded Marcus of both his parents. What are our options, realistically? Chancellor Aldrich consulted the documents spread before them on the library table. Legally, the situation is complex. Lord Ravencrest's claim would depend on proving that the secret ceremony with his mother created a valid marriage, which would make King Edmund's subsequent marriage to Queen Isabella invalid. However, succession law also considers legitimate recognition by the crown and acceptance by the nobility. In other words, Queen Isabella summarized, it comes down to politics rather than pure legal interpretation. Exactly. The Royal Council would ultimately decide the matter, but their decision would be heavily influenced by military and diplomatic factors. If Lord Ravencrest has substantial foreign backing and can demonstrate military strength, the Council might choose him regardless of legal technicalities. Marcus was already thinking tactically. What are our military resources? Can we defend the kingdom if this turns into open conflict? Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Our standing army is spread thin due to the grain shortage crisis in the Western Territories. We have perhaps 3,000 regular troops immediately available, with another 2,000 that could be recalled within a week. But intelligence suggests that the forces massing on our borders number at least twice that. The mathematics of warfare were brutally simple. Valdoria was outnumbered and would be fighting on multiple fronts if the crisis escalated to open conflict. Victory would require either superior strategy or significant political advantages that could divide their enemies. There's another consideration, Prince Alexander said quietly. Even if we could win militarily, the cost in lives and destruction might leave the kingdom so weakened that victory would be meaningless. Marcus looked at the young prince with growing respect. At 16, Alexander was already thinking like a true leader, considering not just immediate tactical concerns, but long-term strategic implications. King Edmund seemed to draw strength from his son's maturity. Then, we need to consider negotiation. If Lord Ravencrest's primary goal is recognition and legitimacy, perhaps there's a solution that doesn't require choosing between competing claims to the throne. What kind of solution? Queen Isabella asked skeptically. Shared succession, Chancellor Aldrich suggested carefully. If we acknowledge Lord Ravencrest as a legitimate heir but maintain Prince Alexander's position as primary successor, it might satisfy both claims while preserving stability. The idea hung in the air like a diplomatic lifeline. But Marcus could see the complications immediately. That would require Lord Ravencrest to accept a subordinate position, which seems unlikely given that he's backed by foreign powers who presumably expect more substantial concessions. Sir William spoke up from his position near the library entrance. Captain, there's also the question of whether we can trust any agreement we might reach. If Lord Ravencrest has been planning this challenge for 20 years, he may view negotiation as simply another tactical step toward complete victory. Before anyone could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the library's high windows, followed by urgent shouting from the palace courtyard. Marcus moved quickly to the window and peered out into the pre-dawn darkness. "It's a messenger," he announced grimly, riding hard from the eastern border. Minutes later, Lieutenant Hayes returned with a muddy, exhausted courier who dropped to one knee before the assembled royalty. "Your Majesty," the man gasped, "Lord Ravencrest has crossed the border with a force of 5,000 men. He's flying the royal banner of Valdoria and claiming to be the rightful heir. The Eastern Garrison commander is requesting immediate instructions." The news hit the library like a physical blow. Their time for careful deliberation had just ended. Lord Ravencrest had made the first move, and it was an act of war disguised as legitimate succession. How long before his forces reached the capital? King Edmund asked, his voice steady despite the crisis. 3 days at most, Your Majesty, assuming they meet no resistance. Marcus felt the familiar clarity that came with the transition from planning to action. Then, we have perhaps 48 hours to consolidate our defenses and determine our response. The negotiation option has effectively been removed. Queen Isabella moved to the window and stared out at the darkness that was slowly giving way to dawn. Or perhaps not entirely removed. If Lord Ravencrest is committed to presenting himself as the legitimate heir, he may still be willing to discuss terms rather than simply conquering the capital by force. "You're thinking of meeting with him?" Prince Alexander asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I'm thinking of using the tools I've learned in 20 years of diplomacy," his mother replied. "Sometimes the only way to defeat an enemy is to get close enough to understand what they truly want." Marcus realized that Queen Isabella was proposing something extraordinarily dangerous. A direct confrontation with Lord Ravencrest that would either resolve the crisis through negotiation or provide the intelligence needed for effective military resistance. King Edmund looked at his wife with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Isabella, if you're suggesting what I think you are, the risk would be enormous. If Ravencrest is as ruthless as his actions suggest, he might simply eliminate you as a threat." "Perhaps," the Queen replied calmly. "But he might also make the mistake of underestimating me. And right now, we need every advantage we can gain." As the first rays of sunlight began to penetrate the library's stained glass windows, Marcus realized that the kingdom of Valdoria was about to face its greatest test in centuries. The next few days would determine not only who wore the crown, but whether the crown would survive at all. The shadows that had hidden the royal family's secrets for 2 decades were finally being burned away by the harsh light of truth, and what emerged from that illumination would either forge a stronger kingdom or destroy everything they had spent their lives protecting. Looking at the faces around him, King Edmund bearing the weight of his past choices, Queen Isabella preparing to risk everything on a desperate gamble, Prince Alexander growing into leadership under the most difficult circumstances imaginable, Marcus felt the full weight of his oath to protect the crown. But, for the first time in his career, he wasn't entirely certain which crown deserved his protection. The story of Valdoria was entering its final chapter, and only time would tell whether it would end in triumph or tragedy.